Welcome to another episode of the TA Table, the official podcast of the Teaching Assistants Training Program at the University of Toronto. We're your hosts, Elliot Fonarev and Estefania Toledo. In this episode, we're discussing anti-racist pedagogy, mindfulness, and inclusive teaching practices. Estefania talked with Jasjit Sangha from the Centre for Teaching and Learning at the University of Toronto Scarborough. What did you talk about?
I was really excited to connect with Jasjit. Jasjit is one of those educators that I've known for quite some time and just admire her pedagogy and the way that she talks about EDI in the classroom. She's given a lot of workshops at the TATP, so it's really amazing to have her here as a guest. And in this conversation, we talked about anti-racist pedagogy as well as mindfulness and how we can apply this within our teaching practice and bring some of these concepts into the classroom. And most importantly, we also discussed practical steps that we can take to build more inclusive learning environments. So to start, let's invite Jasjit to introduce herself.
Thank you so much for having me here. My full name is Jasjit Sangha. I'm working as educational developer with a focus on anti-racist pedagogy at the Centre for Teaching and Learning at U of T Scarborough campus. And prior to this role, I was working for a couple of years at a very similar role at the Centre for Teaching Support and Innovation at St. George campus.
The focus of this episode is anti-racist pedagogy as well as mindfulness practice and teaching and learning, which can mean many things. And what we wanted to do is really anchor this in a specific definition. So I'm going to invite Jasjit to provide a definition and set the context for our conversation.
There's so many definitions of anti-racist pedagogy right now. Whose work I always come back to is Bell Hooks's work on the classroom as a space of most radical possibility in the academy, and how significant it is to have a faculty members, TAs, participating in engaged pedagogy in which they are thinking of themselves as a learner as well as a teacher. So when I'm thinking about anti-racist pedagogy, I'm thinking about we are taking into consideration power, privilege, marginalization, oppression, all of these really incredibly heavy aspects of society. And we are acknowledging that they are also present in the classroom and that the classroom is not a neutral space. So what we're hoping to do with anti-racist pedagogy is to address how power, how marginalization is happening in the classroom. And we're intentionally trying to create change and trying to create more inclusive spaces, more welcoming spaces, so that a student, regardless of their identity, can feel like they belong and they can feel like they matter and that they can see themselves in the actual discipline, that their voice matters, their knowledge matters. It's like addressing issues of racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, faith, as well as all sorts of myriad of identities that are also part of this. If we're thinking about intersectionality and how it impacts students, and then also how it impacts faculty members and that interplay that happens between both student and faculty.
One of the things I appreciate about Jasjit is how she supports educators with bringing pedagogy to life. And she actually shared a really great framework as to how we can bring who you are, how you teach, and what you teach as a starting point for us to reflect on how we can bring some of the critical pedagogy into the classroom.
When I'm facilitating, often what I'm doing is taking the really kind of complex ideas around anti-racist pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy, anti-oppressive pedagogy, and using the lens of who you are, how you teach, and what you teach, and trying to distill quite complex ideas that can be very vulnerable and emotional and make them almost relatable so that folks can engage in a conversation. One of the things that's really important for me in my facilitation is to bring a mindful approach to it. And by that, what I mean is me coming in as a facilitator with my own self-awareness and being able to offer presence and depth in relationship to the material. I'm able to lean into discomfort. When I'm thinking about mindfulness, again, there's many definitions, but how I do interpret it right now is this ability to be present and have a more embodied presence, a more open heart, being able to be receptive to those around me, and How I can do that is because I have this deep relationship with my own sense of self, with who I am. And that allows me to bring this different, more holistic way of being out into the world. So I know that some of these topics can make us feel very vulnerable, and we often haven't been taught how to have difficult conversations in a professional setting without feeling like we need to take a side or we need to take a stand or almost have a debate or an argument about it. So, what I invite folks to do is to engage in deep listening and to learn together and to engage in dialogue. So, for me as a facilitator, to create that space, what's really important is emotional self regulation to help people feel a sense of trust in me as a facilitator, where I'm guiding them and where we're going in the session. So the framework that I've been using is having faculty think about who they are. So that piece around self-reflection, self-knowing, positionality, then thinking about how they teach. So their actual teaching practices in the classroom, teaching presence, active learning, how they're creating an engaging and interactive classroom environment, and then what they teach, which is their actual lesson and their course design. When I was working at CTSI on anti-racist pedagogy, it felt very overwhelming. I was like, how am I going to bring this work forward in a way that folks can relate to without feeling completely overwhelmed by being asked to do so many things and create so many changes when their workload is already quite intense. And it was through conversations with colleagues that this framework emerged. It really resonates with faculty. And I find often when we're talking about critical pedagogy and anti-racist pedagogy, I hear faculty focusing on the what you teach part. And then often I hear from them, my course curriculum is already too full. There's not too much I can add to it. And I can't deviate too much from my colleagues and on what they are doing. And especially for somebody who is coming in as a course instructor and is basically being given one course within a department, they don't feel like they can make too many changes based on what the department is asking of them. What I then like to talk to them about is, okay, then how about the how you teach part and the who you are piece? Because if you can't make too many changes specifically to the course curriculum in certain terms of readings, labs, assignments, can we think about your teaching presence and how can you show students that you are somebody who's bringing an inclusive anti-racist kind of approach to your teaching? Can you be a little more intentional about any examples you use within the classroom environment? And can you show through role modeling, through your presence in the classroom, that you care about the students, right? And this is in the context of you can't make the changes, all the changes you want to make. What are the small things you can do? And then the who you are piece, the way that I always like to think about it is, what are the identities in your classroom in terms of your students' identities that you can relate to, and what are the identities you cannot relate to? And how can you have awareness of that? Because classrooms are so incredibly diverse right now. You may not understand every student's experience, but how can you at least understand that about yourself as the instructor walking into the classroom? Where are your spaces of privilege? Where are your potential spaces of marginalization? And where's that happening for your students? And that in itself can transform the whole classroom environment, can set the tone so that students feel that their identity that they're bringing to the classroom is welcome and they belong.
This is great. I like that Jasjit makes this really concrete and brings that idea of who you are, how you teach, and what you teach, asking different questions to orient ourselves to our classrooms. And Jasjit also works with faculty and teaching assistants. What were the tips that she had for navigating resistance from educators?
A lot of this work can bring up resistance from educators, resistance from students. I know myself, I've experienced resistance even from colleagues when I've tried to introduce critical pedagogy in the classroom. And Jasjit really brought us some practical strategies about how to navigate some of this and really foster a sense of belonging, as well as to how to build community both on campus or in the classroom.
When I have ever faced resistance, it's often because a faculty member might be feeling overwhelmed by this new learning they may not have been exposed to before. That's what I have actually really found, that the resistance is in relationship to overwhelm. So when we can then have that conversation about what they're actually feeling and they can start to feel supported, then we can come up with a solution together, which is, well, what's one thing you can try? What are two things you can try this next term? Even if I always say to faculty, how you create your TA team, like how you engage with your TAs, you're creating change. Because if your TAs are feeling empowered to be their authentic selves and build community with their students, I always tell faculty that the TAs are like this incredibly important part of their teaching, right? Because students will remember that interaction with a TA sometimes more than the professor because they sometimes don't interact with the professor at all. So there's so many ways that faculty can create change that don't require new resources.
So I asked Jasjit to share strategies on how she maintains her energy and motivation. And we actually started talking about different ways that we can practice and sustain joy in our jobs. It doesn't always have to be this emotional labor where we're going home and feeling really depleted. There's lots of different things that we can do to sustain joy, sustain happiness. And that really brought a lot of joy, even just into the conversation, hearing her bring this different perspective.
This work can really feel insurmountable and it can almost feel inhumane sometimes because the amount of work that is needed to create change is so vast and so big. So, how do we feel supported in community together? And how do we work together on this so we're not feeling this sense of us versus them, which is like me doing anti-racist pedagogy work and somebody else on campus who's not doing anything related to this and I have nothing in common with them versus like how am I building bridges and how am I creating community? And for me, what's most incredibly important about this is the work of Stephen Covey and his work around what are the places you can create influence, what are the places where you can create change, and what are the places where you cannot create change or influence. And I think it's really, really important for us to almost use this framework as we're moving forward anti-racist pedagogy work and critical pedagogy work, which is let's start with the things that we can influence and in which we can feel a sense of empowerment. And then let's work towards the things that we can then change directly. And then we can work collectively to create that bigger, wider change that's needed. The hardest thing about this work is feeling like you are alone and that you somehow are the main person to create change. And I'm saying that because often when I do work with faculty, and also again, also working with TAs, working with really everyone around campus, you might be in a specific discipline or a specific department, and you might be the only person, say, who's very committed to equity work. And so you might start to think that it's like almost like a burden on your shoulders. Whereas if you start to talk to other people on campus who are doing this work and you're building bridges, collaboration, co-facilitating, I do a lot of co-facilitating specifically for this reason, so that I don't have that stress and pressure that I have to have it all figured out. And with my co-facilitator, we often somebody from a different department or even a colleague of mine who's working in a different area. We're bringing now two perspectives to this work, which offers the audience again two perspectives, which can be make them again feel more of that curiosity and sense of possibility. I always say to everybody, collaborate with colleagues. Do not feel like you can create this change all by yourself. And that brings me to the well-being piece, because for me, mindfulness, meditation is just the cornerstone of my life, to be honest. And so it just naturally comes into my work. I think it's really, really important to know when you need to take a little bit of space and kind of collect yourself and not to feel like we have to keep going at a rate or a pace that is going to burn ourselves out. So I feel like that pacing piece is really, really important in terms of the well-being. The relationship, the community building is really part of that well-being piece. And whatever practices are that help you to stay grounded. Everybody has their own. Some people hate mindfulness, right? Because they're like, they don't enjoy it, you know? So it's like, what helps you to stay grounded and come back to your own sense of self, of who you are, right? And then that directly has an impact on your work because then you're bringing a different kind of presence to your work, right? So I think it kind of goes hand in hand, both of these things. I'll just add to that. Joy is really hard to feel when you're feeling depleted, and it's really hard to tap into when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling a sense of all of this work, this burden of responsibility is completely on my shoulders. It is impossible to feel joy in those moments, right? And ultimately, it's such an important part of our life too, to celebrate this work, celebrate the little wins that you're having, and also to allow ourselves to feel joy while we are doing this heavy work instead of thinking of it as something that's so heavy that we don't deserve joy almost, or we can't make time for joy, because that's really what makes life so much more fulfilling for us.
So this brings us to the end of this episode. And as we close off, let's bring in Jasjit again for one final time to share resources and advice for educators who really want to start this work or want to explore more or just think about different ways that they can engage in critical pedagogy and mindfulness.
My main piece of advice I would say is you're doing an incredible job. I'm sure of that. Every person that I've ever met through TATP has been just a very committed person who really cares about their work. So really honor that. Honor that you are doing an incredible job and you're doing the best you can. And also start to think about who you are and what you are bringing to the classroom. What are your gifts that you're bringing to the classroom? And really appreciate that about yourself. What you're bringing to the classroom is already incredibly transformative for students and it's already changing students' lives on a daily basis, but you may not even know about it because often students don't tell us about our impact that we're having on them. In terms of learning, I would say all the work being done at TATP is so incredibly transformative. So come to more events, come to in-person events, come to online events and build your community. Join grad writing groups. There's grad writing groups at the Center for Learning Strategy Support, which can be really helpful for TAs who are also in the midst of their own doctoral work. Build your community and really feel like you matter and that you belong on campus so that even though you are doing really tough things and really hard things, that you will still feel like you matter and you belong and that you're cared for and that all of you is welcome on campus.
Amazing episode. That's it for today. Thank you again to Jasjit Sangha for speaking with us. Thanks to our listeners. We're going to put some links to resources in the show notes, and you can find us at the TATP, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. And we hope you'll tune in for more TA Table.
Until next time.